relocation of Benjamin Netanyahu into the Most Israelis still believe Netanyahu is the most suitable
Prime Minister has kicked off his re-election campaign.
With potentially disastrous consequences in Washington.
Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. Here are some of the media stories we're tracking this week. The election in Israel, the coverage of the story, the newspaper that's Netanyahu's biggest backer, and
we run, again and again.
We crunch the numbers for the speech to Congress. Meet the locals who have the knowledge. We examine the role that fixers play in international journalism. And she stopped spreading the news. Rebecca Brooks is done in London and heading for Murdoch headquarters in New York, New York. There's an election process underway in Israel, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made a campaign stop this past week in Washington, D.C. Ostensibly, Netanyahu's address to Congress was about Iran and the nuclear issue. However, the speech was seen as electioneering, with the Republicans in control of Congress gifting Netanyahu a platform and some valuable face time. The way the speech was covered by Israeli newspapers typifies the media divide in Israel that is also a big part of this election story. Yediot Ahronot used to be the most widely read newspaper in the country. Its owner, Arnon Moses, was considered a centrist until about the time that Israel Hayom hit the newsstands. It's owned by an American billionaire, Sheldon Adelson, an unabashed supporter of Prime Minister Netanyahu. Israel Hayom is a free paper. You can even have it delivered to your doorstep for free, which is why it's now the most widely read newspaper in Israel. Israel Hayom is so widely circulated, so influential, that the paper became the target of a new piece of legislation that went before the Knesset a few months back. That law, had it passed, would have made it illegal in Israel to distribute a loss-making newspaper for free. The idea being to prevent wealthy people like Sheldon Adelson from wielding too much influence in a democracy. However, the new law never made it through the Knesset because before it was passed, Netanyahu called the election. The so-called Israel Hayom law was put on hold, and Israelis are now 10 days away from a vote that will determine the future of their leadership and the shape of their news media. Our starting point this week is Tel Aviv.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister of Israel.
When Benjamin Netanyahu went to Washington, he was among friends. He and the Republicans who control Congress share an ideology, an approach to the Middle East, as well as a benefactor. In the 2012 American election, casino-owning billionaire Sheldon Adelson spent at least $100 million trying to get Mitt Romney and as many Republicans elected as possible. If Adelson could do the same in Israel, he probably would. But he can't, so he is making his money and influence felt in other ways.
Israel has very, very strict campaign laws. The amount of money that anybody can donate to a politician is so severely limited that it's insignificant to donate money. So establishing a newspaper, you better believe that that has a significant impact on how people think about current events. Absolutely.
You can find some patron with a lot of money and create for yourself your own little, historical pravda of the old Soviet Union, where one opinion is voiced. It's sort of a propaganda tool in disguise, only the disguise is not a very sophisticated one.
Sheldon Adelson is a Jewish American whose wife is a citizen of Israel. He launched Israel Hayom, which means Israel Today, in 2007. Within 3 years, it was the most widely circulated newspaper in the country, displacing Yediot Ahronot. The difference between the two papers and their respective owners, Adelson and Arnon Moses, has been laid bare in their coverage of this campaign.
The rivalry between the owners, to a large degree, is what defines the content of these papers. Obviously, this has nothing to do with journalism. This is a rivalry that is on one hand commercial and on the other political. It has to do with the personalities and ideologies of the owners of these publications, which then influences the content.
So whereas you'd see in Yediot Ahronot, the front page was just basically top to bottom about Sarah Netanyahu, Benjamin Netanyahu's wife, who has a very long record of erratic behavior, and all these different major analysts weighing in as to why it was important and significant.
Whereas if you take a look at the front page of Israel Hayom, in exact same period of time last week. It is all directed at the speech at Congress. One headline, for example, said, "I am traveling to alert the United States about the dangers of the deal with Iran." You can see Benjamin Netanyahu standing and praying at the Wailing Wall. And the narrative here is a very clear one, of course. It is religious, even I would say messianic narrative that they're trying to paint.
What has come to be known as the Israel Hayom law passed first reading in the Knesset in November, backed by members of 5 different parties, including some in Netanyahu's own coalition. The law would have banned Israel Hayom or any mass circulation free newspaper from getting to market. The law sees such papers as threats to Israel's democracy. And there has been plenty of speculation that the Prime Minister made the decision to go to the polls early because of the Israel Hayom factor. Had Netanyahu waited and called the election a year from now, Adelson's free paper might not have been around to back him.
I think that Netanyahu was very disappointed, obviously, to see his coalition partners supporting that law in some cases. And I think that that certainly encouraged him, among a bunch of other issues, to see that the coalition wasn't working, and there was a good reason to have a kind of snap election.
Nobody has produced a smoking gun to prove this. There were other reasons that Netanyahu gave for dissolving the coalition. It seems we will never truly know what happened. But even if it is not the main reason, it certainly was a factor. And there is a dependence between Netanyahu and Adelson that is very concerning. And because of all the positive coverage that Adelson has given Netanyahu over the years, he owes him a favor and now needs to dance to his tune.
Yisrael Hayom is not the first free newspaper to be introduced into the Israeli media scene. It's just the biggest one. But that's a pretty slippery slope. To pass a draconian law that forbids anyone to distribute a newspaper for free. So what if some pro-peace group has no funding, starts a sort of an ad hoc newspaper and wants to just stand on the corners distributing it and saying, "We want peace with the Palestinians now, we demand negotiations today." And then a police stops them and said, "You're under arrest for distributing a newspaper for free." I mean, clearly it goes both ways, and I just think it's a really supremely bad idea.
This was a first reading of a bill which was intended and tailored specifically to go after a free newspaper that was a mass circulation newspaper. The bill's not a broad general law that says, okay, we're going to get rid of free newspapers. But I think it also relates to Israeli history. If you look back to the 1950s, many Knesset legislators wanted to get rid of Ha'alam Hazeh, which was Yuri Avneri's leftist newspaper. And in the 60s and 70s, many times Israel tried to shut down Al Ittihad, which was a communist newspaper. So I think that what we see in Israel is kind of just this heavy-handed approach sometimes, which is that the politicians think, if we don't like something, let's ban it.
Israelis are fortunate in that they live in a wired society and have as many options for news online as there are issues in this election. In the news business, you get what you pay for. In the case of Israel Hayom, readers are getting what Sheldon Adelson pays for, a free newspaper that many in Israel think the country and the democracy can no longer afford.
We're lucky to have some more open venues such as the internet. There's no editor and there's no newspaper owner, but newspapers are here to stay. It's a very significant moment in the history and future of Israeli media. And I think partly it's going to have to do with the results of this upcoming election.
On the download this week, our viewers weigh in on the coverage of the election story in Israel.
I don't see the paper battle having such a big impact on this election, mostly because people look at the media as a little bit of a supermarket. If you're to the left, you're going to be reading papers that are more to the left. If you're to the right, you're going to look at papers that are more to the right. Israelis are getting their information about the election from plenty of places. It's not just the newspapers, it's also radio, it's also television. Of course, the internet is a major play.
If you want to get a holistic picture of what's happening politically or in every other aspect, you need to read at least two newspapers, or you need to watch at least 2 different news broadcasts on TV. Or you can just simply go to the sites like 972, which is in English, that they give a broader and much more comprehensive perspective.
Other media stories that are on our radar this week. The authorities in India have issued a blanket ban on the broadcasting of a documentary about a case of rape and murder that led to nationwide demonstrations 2 years ago. The film, called India's Daughter, was made for the BBC. It tells the story of 23-year-old Jyoti Singh getting gang raped and killed on a bus in New Delhi. It includes an interview from inside a Delhi jail with one of the alleged attackers, a man sentenced to death for the crime. In that interview, he suggests that if the victim had not fought back, she would not have been killed, and that she put herself at risk by being out after 9 p.m. in New Delhi. Defending the ban, a Delhi government official was quoted as saying, "What kind of journalism is this? Interviewing a rapist and airing his views," he said. "Why should people be told why he did it?" India's Home Minister Rajnath Singh argued that the film was derogatory to women. Leslie Udwin, the filmmaker, rejected those arguments. She said the ban is flying in the face of civilized values. India should be embracing this film, not blocking it with a knee-jerk hysteria without even seeing it. The ban also prompted the BBC to bring the UK airing of the film forward. The Indian government says YouTube then took the film down at New Delhi's request, but it has since been reposted and shared multiple times by individual users and other interested parties. Anyone who thought that we'd seen the last of Rebekah Brooks just doesn't understand the way Rupert Murdoch operates. And 8 months after being acquitted of phone hacking charges, it looks like she's just about ready for her next job at News Corporation. According to reports in The Guardian, among other British newspapers, which are as of yet unconfirmed, Brooks is ticketed for the company's headquarters in New York and an executive position dealing with the company's online ventures, including the social media news site Storyful, which News Corp purchased back in 2013. The Guardian broke the phone hacking story, so it still has good sources inside the Murdoch media empire. Brooks has already received a golden handshake from News Corp for roughly $25 million, which was described as compensation for future loss of earnings. She was the editor of the News of the World and the Sun tabloids before running the London-based arm of the Murdoch print empire, News International, which is now known as News UK. She resigned at the height of the phone hacking scandal in 2011. Just what expertise the ex-tabloid editor will bring to News Corp's social media strategies is not entirely clear, but Brooks has always been a Murdoch favorite. In Bangladesh, an arrest has been made in connection with the murder of a prominent atheist blogger. The authorities there say that Farabi Shafiur Rahman is the main suspect after Avijit Roy was hacked to death in the capital Dhaka, February 26th. His wife and fellow blogger Rafida Ahmed survived the attack, but suffered severe wounds. Roy had dual citizenship, American and Bangladeshi. He was in Dhaka for a book fair when he was killed. He was an outspoken atheist. He used his blog, Mukta Mona, or Free Mind, to criticize religion and politics. Police say that the suspect, Rahman, belongs to the banned militant group Hizb ut-Tahrir, and say that he was planning an attack for months. The U.S.-based free speech charity Center for Inquiry, which Roy also contributed to, said Dr. Roy was a true ally, a courageous and eloquent defender of reason, science, and free expression in a country where those values have been under heavy attack. Following the murder, protesters on the streets of Dhaka demanded justice and an end to attack on secular bloggers in Bangladesh. That journalist's byline, the correspondent's piece to camera, ever wonder who's working behind the scenes to make those stories happen? News consumers have some vague notions of editors going over a reporter's copy or camera operators working the other side of the lens, but we're here to introduce you to another key player in the process, particularly in the reporting of international news. They're called fixers. And although there's a pejorative aspect to the job title, a fixer is the local talent, the man or woman on the ground who secured that critical interview, gained access to that all-important location, who read between the lines when the situation was rife with local complexity. In short, a fixer knows how to navigate the news terrain and open doors the way few foreign correspondents can by themselves. Fixers are not only a foreign correspondent's eyes and ears, but they're also their early warning system. Being close to a story often means the danger is only one wrong turn away, and fixers, while not always acknowledged in this role, have to become security specialists as well, sometimes putting themselves in the line of fire as a consequence. With all of those responsibilities, do they get the recognition that they deserve? The Listening Post's Will Young now on fixers, so often the unsung heroes of journalism.
snipers firing straight down.
Grave danger.
This place has been hammered by airstrikes.
For every dashing war correspondent who drops into the middle of a conflict or a crisis, there's a local fixer who's made it all possible.
These people are more than people that just solve minor problems. They are very often some of the smartest people in the country you visit.
A local on the ground who has a place wired and knows how to get around, knows the local customs, and in many cases knows the story better than reporters who have just arrived on a plane.
They will understand the local sense of humour, they'll understand what people really mean. They normally got the sort of connections and the cultural understandings that journalists doesn't necessarily have.
The term fixer, as it applies in the broadcast industry, are in actuality local producers and journalists themselves.
Meet Inky Nakpil. She's helped journalists navigate everything from Philippines culture to natural disasters across a 22-year career as a fixer.
The most important trait of a good fixer is persistence. No is not an option. So that means you have to exhaust all possibilities to make something happen. A fixer should also be likable and agreeable because you're only as good as how much these people will let you into their lives, how much these people are willing to share with you, how much these people are willing to help you.
The fixer, I consider him as the eye of any foreigners inside the area. As we say in Arabic, the stranger is blind, even he has eyes.
Khalid Abu Ghali is a trained nurse and paramedic. He's also been helping journalists cover the story in Gaza for the last 14 years.
Each culture has habits, and different attitude and different behavior. It's not a matter of a language only. Even an Arabic journalist will come to the area and he's not well aware of what's going on. He needs a fixer.
The word fixer can carry negative connotations, which is why when one falls in the line of duty, like Syrian Abu Yezen al-Hamoui, who was shot and killed while working for Al Jazeera in 2012, they're sometimes, in posthumous reports, promoted to the status of journalist or local producer. And international reporters were perhaps never more dependent on locals than during the war in Iraq, when it was Iraqi journalists doing most of the news gathering and, consequently, most of the dying. Rashid Hamid Wali, killed by a sniper in 2004. Farha Haider, kidnapped and executed in 2005. Khalid W. Hassan, shot and killed in 2007. Just 3 among the 54 so-called media support workers killed in Iraq between 2003 and 2011. And in Afghanistan in 2009, New York Times reporter Stephen Farrell and his Afghan fixer Sultan Munadi were taken hostage by Taliban fighters. When US and British Special Forces planned a rescue operation, Munadi's family urged them to hold off, saying they were negotiating with the hostage takers. The raid went ahead anyway. The Times reporter was freed. Munadi, the fixer, paid with his life. When it comes to reporting complex, conflict-ridden news stories, it's not just the fixers who find themselves in the front lines. Whenever any journalist, cameraman, local producer or other media worker loses their life in a hostile environment, it serves to highlight just how much fixers are relied upon, not only to open doors, but also to be aware of what dangers might lurk behind them.
The first dimension to consider the security of the team who is coming from abroad, it's to be one of his priority. This is very sensitive part and very important part, not only for the fixer, but also for the crew that he's working with, especially if there is conflict. Because to be at area with conflict, your mistakes will be the first and the last one. And not only the life of the fixer will be under risk, but also the life of the others.
What you want is someone who's going to help keep you out of trouble, someone who is strong enough to push back on the things that you're requesting and, will tell you that you're being dangerous. Fixers have an incredibly sensitive spidey sense, and they know when you should not be doing what you're proposing doing.
Their responsibilities have always been varied, but now it's their recognition that's also growing. While budgets for international reporting are squeezed throughout the industry, local journalists and fixers are picking up the slack.
And news organisations, because of the difficulties they've had commercially over the last decade, have been closing down Foreign Bureau, and increasingly the burden is falling on local journalists, fixers, of course, freelancers to fill the gap.
Story Live now to Gaza. We'll talk to the BBC's Rushdie Abu Alouf.
So there is an opportunity. You've got these local journalists who the new financial environment is supporting and giving opportunity to do more reporting themselves.
I think we are starting to see a change in the way that fixers are treated. People are starting to recognize them as producers in their own right. But there's a double-edged sword there where people who helped you get access to a rebel group in this country or some subversive political element in another country become targets. So you really have to be very careful about the situations in which you give that credit. The fixer is still there in their home country, and they're going to be the ones who pay the price.
A shared byline for the work that we do as fixers is, of course, important to us and much appreciated. But there are times when you operate on very delicate subject matter, so at times it is also good to have your name left out. Since it is the fixer who made the initial contact and it is the fixer who is left behind long after the foreign journalist has returned to their own country.
If you're a journalist on unfamiliar ground, it's likely to be your fixer who'll arrange that key interview, open the right doors and maybe even get you out of a fix from time to time. But by and large, fixers remain in the background.
Many of people, they just know the international correspondent and the news presenters, But for us as fixer or for those who are working in the media, they know that behind this person is an army of people who are preparing and making this matter easy for him, gathering news and gathering articles and to make a good story and to make a good reputation for the channel.
More voices on the download now on the role that fixers play in the coverage of news.
More and more journalists with roots in the Middle East are working as correspondents for foreign publications, and I consider them the best reporters in the region. But many publications are still hiring journalists who lack the language skills and knowledge to conduct their jobs independently. And many of these foreign journalists are not giving proper credit to the local journalists who work with them, by either sticking their names at the bottom of stories or by excluding their names entirely. There's a word for taking credit for other people's work: plagiarism.
Finally, no one likes to be interrupted while speaking unless it's for applause or, better still, a standing ovation. Benjamin Netanyahu's speech to Congress last week lasted 45 minutes. He managed to slip the word Iran into the speech 107 times. He was interrupted for applause 39 times and 23 times for standing ovations. That's roughly 2.5 Iran mentions per minute and one standing ovation every 2 minutes. Now, that's either a great speech or an audience that's determined to be impressed. Israeli journalist and techno producer Noy Alosha took this speech, he put it to a beat, and he ends up with a version that has Netanyahu playing Congress like a yo-yo, up and down. We'll see you next time here at the Listening Post.
Ladies and gentlemen, we must always remember three things. First, Iran. Second, Iran. And third, Iran, 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 again and again. Like, first, Iran. Second, Iran. And third, Iran, Iran, Iran. Stand down, stand down, stand down. Twice, not once, twice. Stand down, stand down, stand down. Good to see you back on your feet. I can guarantee you this. Many Iran's Iran bombs. Iran's Iran bombs. Iran's Iran